Hello, and welcome to the Cultivating Confidence podcast. I am your host, Dr. Nicole Grams. I am a life coach who specializes in anxiety, health, and human design. And I also happen to be a functional medicine pharmacist. This podcast is a compilation of conversations that I've had with clients and colleagues. So listen in as we explore the mind, body, and soul's confidence in its many forms. All right. So we have talked about beliefs here before, but as a quick refresher, a belief is just a thought that has been likely has been repeated over and over and over again in your mind. And sometimes these beliefs are from conditioning, like if you grew up thinking that you were the black sheep of the family, or that you didn't know how to do math, or, like there's some sort of inadequacy that you're having. And we've all got our own unique flavor of what that was and who we heard it from. It wasn't always from our parents. Sometimes it was from teachers or caregivers or friends or, bullies at school, all these things. But along this journey of growth, you may have heard something like about how in order to grow, you have to be willing to believe new things. Now, I have talked about that as being part of the whole deal. Like, it's true, though, like the beliefs that you currently have got you exactly where you are right now. And if you are looking to change where you are right now, new beliefs have to come in, right? You can't grow by believing the exact same things that you believe, most likely. But you start believing things like, I can do it, and I'm worthy, and I love myself, and all this sounds great, right? You're opening yourself up to possibility. And some of the old thoughts just naturally kind of drop off pretty easily when you start to bring in that new possibility in. But it feels like a treacherous road as we go, but it's worth it, right? Growth. And it's either for growth's sake or for a specific purpose. Like if you're starting a business or finding more fulfillment in your career or a new relationship or pursuing a new hobby or learning to play a new instrument or any number of 1,000 zillion different things that you could pick, right? So as we're trekking along on this treacherous, new, scary back path, we start to realize that, what all the gurus are saying is actually real. Like they talk about believing new things. You're like, oh yeah, got it. Totally mind blowing, changed my life. Great. Let's do it. Right. And then they talk about how it doesn't get easier. You just get used to it, or, you just have to relearn the same things over and over again. And they tell you about how it still sucks to go through this process every time, right? Like, and on some level you believe it, but you kind of think about like how you have to relearn the same lessons over and over and over again on a deeper level every time. And you're like, yeah, that's like intellectually that makes sense, right? But they don't, or they also say that you don't stop feeling negative emotions. And again, at least in my experience, it's been one of those things where I'm like, yeah, I totally get that. That totally makes sense, right? It's just easier to process them when you're used to feeling them. Life is always 50-50. I got it, right? I'm all in, bring on the sucky 50%, right? Like we're going to examine more, we're going to explore more, we're going to keep going. Like this is fine. It's not going to be too bad, right? And then if you're anything like me, you get to the point every single time where you are absolutely shocked that it's not easy this time learning this lesson again, right? I've been floored so many times. Like I spend time on a very regular basis with my coach, like talking about how I have to relearn the same thing that I just learned, sometimes even last week, right? Like I'm relearning the same things, but it doesn't get easier. And it's actually feels like it's harder because I've learned how to do it, and like I shouldn't still be struggling with it, right? But for me, it's still worth it to keep going because I'm not done. I haven't reached all the people that I want to reach. I want to keep going, right? And this is the part where a lot of people will stop. They will stop and they'll say, you know what? I'm kind of over this. I'm done with it being hard. I just want life to be easier. Right. And that's what we think that we want when we start this journey. And then we realize easy is really boring and not fulfilling and kind of exhausting. Right. But yeah, if you had told me where I would be 5 years ago, if you talked to me, I would have absolutely laughed you out of the room. Like, it's not possible for me to do that. Like, I'm totally fine where I am. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. I'm happy here. And I was freaking wrong, right? Like, I didn't even know how wrong I was because I had convinced myself so thoroughly that I was telling my truth, right? I hadn't even reconsidered anything because everything had worked out as I had once planned, right? I literally had my life planned out from 10th grade. I took one of those aptitude tests. I made a snide remark about my results and about how pharmacist wasn't specifically listed on there. And my teacher like met my eye in that moment as I was saying this. And he said, Nicole, you can be a pharmacist. I know you can do this. I know that you can be a pharmacist if that's what you want. And then he also added, as a side note, I also dated a pharmacist once and, made a lot of money. Like, he rubbed his fingers together to indicate how much money pharmacists made. And I was like, all right, that's my selling point. We're good. Like, I figured out what I want to do. From that moment on, I was set. I had my plan. I believed that I could do it, and I executed on that plan flawlessly, right? There was no roadblock in my path, right? There were scary moments along the way, but my belief that I could do it never wavered. There was these moments where I was like, oh, I'm not sure about this. This is really what I want. Maybe like, there was a time that I miscalculated a grade that I needed in order to pass a class, right? It was that close. Like, I was having a rough time that semester, and I had miscalculated the grade that I needed on the final in order to pass without having any sort of academic probation or whatever. I got the results back and I had finished 1 point below what I had calculated. And I was like, oh, this is not good, right? That doubt came into my mind about my path that day, right? I felt some things. It was rough. And it was only when I looked at my overall grade on the online thing that I realized that I actually did pass. And it was my math before the exam giving too much weight to this exam that I was wrong about. I didn't realize that until I saw that I still had a passing grade, right? But even if I had failed that class, it wouldn't have been the end of the world. It would not have meant my journey ended, right? That would have been a bump that was unexpected, but I would have done what I needed to do in order to finish in that in between moment where I saw my grade and saw my like the exam grade and saw the final grade. I was like, all right, I can't be the only one that this has ever happened to, right? Like, I have to go back. I got to figure out what I need to do. I'm going to still do it, whatever it takes, right? I'm going to do it. And that was the belief that carried me through the entire college experience, right? My underlying belief was, I can figure this out. I can do this. And even though I beat myself up on the regular to get there, I still had my own back in that I'd be able to figure it out, right? So my belief was that it was possible, that I could do it, right? I had decided what my path looked like, and I believed I knew what classes to take. There was basically a how-to guide laid out in front of me because people had done this exact thing before, right? They had gone through pharmacy school. I knew how much money I'd make for the rest of my life after I was done. And I believed so strongly in this particular path that I never once thought to question it. And I feel like a lot of people in these professional careers go that route as well. And we get to a certain point in life where we're like, this isn't it, right? I was supposed to be happy by now, and I'm not, right? I needed to work on finding new beliefs in that moment of my unhappiness. I knew I was no longer feeling fulfilled in my role, and my world kind of came crashing down around me. And it really, really sucked to break down all the walls that I had built up, all of the beliefs that I had. I basically had to bring that flashlight into the basement to see all the mold that was growing, right? Those were my beliefs that I had left unmanaged for decades, right? And I could finally see how broken and limiting they actually were. And it sucked so bad. I did thought work. Some of it shook me to my core, but most of it though was kind of done on this topical, like absorbing level. I just filled my ears with people who believed, and I tried on their belief. I had podcasts going nonstop. I was listening, always learning different perspectives, always like trying to shine little lights in slightly more places in my brain of the like, oh yeah, I can totally believe that. Tried on the belief, embodied that belief, slowly let their beliefs take over in my brain, right? This was helpful to a certain extent. And it was through doing this that I finally started to realize how critical I was on myself. I was being on myself. And it was something that my coach said that made me realize it. And all she said was, Nicole, you are so hard on yourself, after I had said something. And it was in that moment that I realized I have heard this 1,000 times before, but right now is when I finally am open enough to understand. And I was like, oh, that's what the self-criticism is. I hadn't even realized that's what it was because I was so used to hearing it. Like it was just my truth. I was just reporting the news about how much I sucked and how much I wasn't able to do anything. It had never occurred to me that that was just a thought in my brain until that moment. Right. So ever since that moment, I have been working very diligently on my self-criticism, getting rid of it, thinking that I'd be able to overcome it. And that's what my problem was, right? That's what was holding me back. And if I work on this problem, then I will get to the place I want to go, right? And I went about it in such a way that I believed was useful. But the funny thing about that is self-criticism is actually evolutionarily useful, right? It sounds weird, but self-criticism is something that back in the day helped us stick to the needs of the tribe, right? What the tribe thinks is acceptable. We have to stay in this box in order to not be rejected and thrown out to the tigers to be eaten, right? So brain is still in this, like, we need to be accepted into the group sort of mentality, and we're not physically in danger anymore for the most part. But now these beliefs that we have are just things that are stuck on repeat that somebody put in your head, most likely when you were a kid, right? Most likely some of it happened in adulthood, but it usually piggybacked off of beliefs that you already have in your brain, right? But when I figured out that I had been using self-criticism to do just about everything in my life, I realized how burned out and exhausted I was because of that specific thing. Like it wasn't what I needed, what I was doing that was exhausting. It was the way I was doing it. It was the way I was beating the crap out of myself in order to keep going, right? I knew I needed to change because I was over it, right? Like we're done. Now, as I became more conscious of what my brain was thinking, right, about the self-criticism, brain kept doing as brain does, right? It absolutely rebelled against this new idea because self-criticism is what worked every single time in the past. Brain knew that this is what works. This is what gets the job done perfectly, right? Took a long ass time to get done because it had to be perfect. But that's what brain knew how to do, right? Every time it pressed that button, I reacted. Every time I got anxious, that button was pressed and I would get up and do something. And sometimes I would get so overwhelmed with all of it that I sank into a deep depression because I was listening too much to my brain and not listening at all to what my body was telling me it needed, which was rest, self-care, right? And it was at this point kind of where I cut the wire on the self-criticism button. I stopped judging myself for resting, and there were some definite wins there, right? Like I made progress and I was like, okay, we're not doing this anymore. Set my boundary, wavered on the boundary, went back into old habits again and again and again, right? Reset the boundary. And then finally I was like, no, like F this, I'm done. I'm over it. This is final now, right? This is final. Brain still doesn't understand. Brain is still trying to do what brain has always done and keeps pressing the goddamn button, right? Like, now the button still makes the noise. It still is shouting, but it's at this point, it's kind of like a toy that the battery is dying from. It's like, oh, you should, right? Like it just runs out of steam halfway through. And I can catch it before it finishes that sentence sometimes. But other times it comes back rejuvenated and filled up with vigor, right? And this was my self-criticism button on its last legs, yelling and screaming. And it's like, see what you're doing. Nothing else works except for this button. And you're not doing it right. You're clearly not doing it right at all. It's not enough. No one's listening. You'll never find another fuel to take action. This is the only fuel we have. It's a waste of your time. All of this you did, if you did it my way, the way that I see it worked in the past, this is what's going to work, right? It comes up with a whole list of how inadequate I am and what I'm doing wrong, right? And I recently had this epiphany. I named this phase. I named it the whiny little bitch phase, where I can look back and see it in smaller forms, the outer layers of it, if you will. But this time it was like consuming my entire soul. Everything I could do, everything I thought about doing was exhausting. Everything was not good enough. I'm not far enough. Every single turn I made was just suck, right? And at this point, brain is so mad that the button is working, it just gets whinier and whinier and shouts louder and louder like a toddler not getting their way. Hence the name, the whiny little bitch phase, right? That's what it's being, right? Full on meltdown, tantrum mode, everything sucks. I'm in the pit of misery, right? And I got coached because I was like, I'm done being in this pit. I need some sort of perspective to get me out of this, right? I clearly can't figure it out myself. I asked for help. And I flat out told my coach, my brain is being a whiny little bitch. Now, I was very careful, and I know not to self-identify what brain is doing. So I was at least like aware that, okay, brain is doing this now. It's not me. It's what brain is doing. And I kind of blacked out for the middle part of the coaching because I was so far in that pit, but I re-listened to it since then. But like in the middle of it, I was just like, like flopping around like a fish out of water, right? Like, I don't know what I'm doing. Everything sucks. But something my coach said clicked in there because the next morning, well, it's something she clicked because she obviously has the perspective of having gone through this before herself, right? And she is familiar with all of the stuff brain does. And she was able to, in some way, tell me that this is just another part of the process and nothing has gone wrong, right? But the next morning, I was finally able to slip back into observer mode about what my brain is doing. And I think we've kind of talked about observer mode. And I noticed that that's exactly what it was doing, was having a tantrum, right? This is a part of my brain that does not think what I'm doing is safe or what I'm trying to do is safe, right? It's having a tantrum, and it is my turn to step in and parent myself again. Brain was letting me know that it was not feeling safe trying this new thing. All I needed to do was acknowledge it, give it a big energetic hug, let it know that it is safe. I got this. We are changing our engine, which hurts. We're changing engines so we can use a different fuel now. And it's scary, it's terrifying, and it will wreck yourself if you don't have guidance through it, in my experience, at least. Maybe some of you can do it on your own, but it was way more scary than I ever imagined. But we're going to give this new fuel a try. Like we're going to do this. It's going to be okay no matter what. And what happened was I was willing to be wrong about the river of misery, about drowning in the river of misery, right? I was willing to be wrong about being in it in the first place by stepping into observer mode. Like, maybe I'm not, maybe I'm wrong. I was willing to be wrong about anything being wrong in the first place, because who better to guide people through this in the future than someone who has been through it, right? I was willing to see why brain was acting this way and understand why. And I was willing to open up finally to the idea that changed me in that moment. That the only thing I remember saying back to my coach, the thought of I am capable. For some reason, that had only been a fleeting thought in my brain periodically of I am capable, but it like touched me in my soul in that moment. And I finally understood that it's not just about believing new things, it's about being willing to be wrong about what you have, about what you know, about what you're doing, right? You have to be willing to be wrong about everything. You have to be willing to be wrong about who you are and what you do, right? The way you do things. You have to be willing to be wrong about what people tell you that you believe, even if it makes sense, right? And now, when I start to come up against some resistance, it has helped me immensely to ask my new question, what am I willing to be wrong about here? And for some reason, just that phrasing has been revolutionary for me. And actually, just today, I had a breakthrough from this question. Am I willing to be wrong about needing to get rid of the self-criticism in order to reach my potential? Like, what if I really am capable of doing everything I need to do to succeed right now with all of the garbage, right? I don't have to dump it all out. I don't have to get rid of it. I can work with it, right? And what do I need to hear from myself? What do I need to tell myself to know that it's safe for me to move forward, even with bringing all the garbage with me that I have been very distinctly trying to fight for years now, right? What if it's possible for me to move forward with all my demons? And I'd like to lend you guys the option too to question yourself about it. What if it is possible for you to move forward with all of your demons along for the ride? Thank you for taking the time to listen in today. Many of you will be able to take the ideas that you've heard and apply them in your daily life, and that's really all you need. That's amazing. But for those of you who could use a little one-on-one help with how to make these things actually work for you in your real life, please reach out. The link to schedule a consult with me is in the show notes. You don't have to do this alone. See you soon.